Brighton might. The engines were excited. Some special visitors were coming from the mainland on a rail tour and were to pay visits to Oakham Road and to see Stepney and Bluebell while they were visiting. The new controller had told them that Pip and Emma, the high-speed diesels, were to bring the visitors. "It'll be nice seeing those two again," smiled Edward when Tom told him the news. "Pip and Emma are good friends of ours and are always happy to meet new engines. You'll get along with them well, I'm sure." But unfortunately for them, this wasn't to be the case. On the day of the visit, the Fat Controller received a call from the other railway. Pip and Emma had both had trouble with their cooling systems and so were unable to take the visitors. The Fat Controller was most concerned. "I can't spare Gordon or any other engines to fill in," he said. "Don't you have another engine we could use?" Another engine was soon found, one whose duties could easily be covered for, and who knew the route to the island well. The Fat Controller was most relieved, and made the necessary arrangements at once. The engines were disappointed at not seeing their friends, but were glad when the news came that the train would be arriving nonetheless. "Well, that's certainly a relief," said Stepney when Thomas told him the news that morning. "I wonder who'll be bringing the train instead," pondered Leo, as the three engines waited at the platform for the visitors to arrive. Soon there came the familiar purr of a diesel approaching them, and the rattling of heavy coaches packed full of people. The engines whistled at a friendly greeting, but Thomas's face fell when the replying horns sounded. "Oh no," Thomas groaned. "Don't tell me it's—" No one needed to tell Thomas, for here he was, the very same diesel who had taunted Thomas on that fateful day months ago, when his long depression began. The diesel purred into the station, stopping with a hiss, a squealing of brakes, and a very nasty look. "Well, well, well," he sneered at Thomas. He didn't seem to have noticed Stepney and Leo waiting on the sidings. Leo eyed the diesel with a frown. "If it isn't the world's last E2 brand kettle," the diesel sneered. "Don't you think you should be in a museum somewhere instead of clanking around this out-of-date island that's just as much as antique as you?" "Go away," Thomas hissed. The diesel laughed, and was just about to retort when Leo rolled forward. "Oi!" he snapped. "Leave my brother alone, Burdock!" The diesel went bright red, and stared with a fierce look on his face at the engine who had spoken. His expression quickly turned to shock, and then into a sneer. "I heard some news about an engine here that recently been rebuilt from junk and scrap," he sneered. "And I'm guessing it's you, isn't it?" "Yes," said Leo, not breaking his gaze. "What of it?" "Nothing," the diesel sniffed. "I would have thought it would have made me one of those mainline express engines. At least they had some class, rather than an obsolete engine who was scrapped because his class was deemed of little importance to the network." Leo ignored the taunt. "Sticks and stones," he hissed. "At least people wanted to preserve us. Who'd want a nasty piece of work like you?" "At least I'm still in service, Lionheart," sniffed the diesel. "The company still views me as useful, which is more than I can say for how they considered you and your sort all those years ago. If you ask me, they should have left you for scrap, not wasted the money on restoring a useless engine from a useless breed." "Now that's quite enough of that!" Stepney snapped. The diesel glanced at him and scoffed. "Humph! Yet another comic waste!" he jeered. "Rebuilding an obsolete engine is one thing, but keeping one pointering up and down an ancient piece of track for several decades, I hate to think of the bills they had to pay on a lost cause." Angry hissing and other savage noises followed this, causing passengers to gather round and stare as the engines exchanged insults. In the end, the new controller had to come and stop the noise. When it was time for the visitors to leave, the engines pulled vulgar faces at the leaving diesel, who was still smirking. "Good riddance," snarled Leo when the last coach had left. "Has he given you grief before then, Thomas?" Thomas explained about their meeting back at the junction. "He certainly hasn't changed much," Leo said gravely. "You've met him before then?" asked Stepney. "Yes, we used to work on the same region for a while back in the old days," Leo explained. "I never liked him. Always rude and nasty to me, and any steam engine for that matter. Just a general nasty piece of work." "Why did you call him Burdock?" asked Thomas. Leo gave a slight cough, which might have been hiding a snigger. "It's a long story," he said, as their crews returned. "I'll tell you two later, if we've got time, but right now we've got work to do." The three engines went back to work, all of them aside from Leo, who was chuckling quietly to himself, and were thinking of ways to pay the diesel out. Their chance came sooner than expected. The diesel was purring through the countryside, chuckling at his own wit. "Poor engines," he smirked. "They just can't accept that times had changed, and that diesels run the rails of Britain single-handed." He chuckled as he rounded a curve and pulled into a station. As it was summer on Sodor, the flowers and blossoms of spring had long since vanished, and the field cuttings were now writhing with seeding trees. Weeds spread fast at this time of year, and the embankments were covered in a fluffy white blanket of dandelions. The gangers regularly cleared the tracks, and the special ballast prevented most weeds from growing back. But they were unable to control the sheer mass of dandelions on the line side, which were now teeming with seeds, waiting to be carried away by the wind. When the wind came, it blew in small puffs, rushing over the embankments and sending a thin cloud of white fluff into the air. The diesel blasted through it with a rush and a roar, growling when the seeds tickled his face and went into his mouth. "Blech!" he spluttered. He tried everything to get rid of them, hissing, snarling, even blasting his horn at them. But still the loathsome fluff came down.